Good morning, and welcome to day 2 of the Women in Tech and Innovation Forum, sponsored by the Governor's Commission for Women, the Texas Film Commission, AT&T, and Spur. We're so excited to have you back with us today. And our first panel this morning is going to be a conversation about broadband in Texas. And we're very excited to welcome Adriana Cruz, the Executive Director of Economic Development and Tourism for the Office of the Governor. She's also a member of the Board of Advisors on the Comptroller's Broadband Development for the Comptroller's Broadband Development Office. That's a lot of words, sorry. And Jennifer Harris. Jennifer is the State Program Director for Texas at Connected Nation, Inc., and she's also a member of the Board of Advisors for the Comptroller's Broadband Development Office. I think this is going to be a really great conversation, and we're so happy you're here. Don't forget, we have 2 more sessions following this one, and thank you for participating. This program has been pre-recorded, so we will be following up with Jennifer for a live Q&A after, so please make sure you stick around.
Great. Well, thank you, Stephanie, and good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us today at the 2022 Women in Tech and Innovation Forum. As Stephanie said, I'm Adriana Cruz. I'm the Executive Director for Economic Development and Tourism, and I appreciate you joining us for today's panel, a very timely conversation about broadband access in Texas today and in the future. And I'm honored to be joined by one of our state's experts, Jennifer Harris, who is the State Program Director for Connected Nation. And we have a lot to talk about today. The pandemic has created a new environment and highlighted many issues, including the need for broadband access across the state. So I'm going to kick it off and turn it over to Jennifer and ask you, Jennifer, tell us about Connected Nation and the work that Connected Nation does.
Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. I'm so excited to be here today and be chatting about broadband. Connected Nation, we are a 501c3 national nonprofit. We've actually existed for 21 years this month. So we got to spend all of last year celebrating our 20th anniversary of working on broadband. And as of February, now we are 21 years old as a nonprofit. Our focus has really been on making sure that all Americans, and therefore all Texans, do have access to broadband, but then also, are actually subscribing to it and then have the skills to use it to really improve their lives.
Well, I mean, what a timely, time for you to be active in this space and to be helping the state as we came out of 2020 and suddenly we were all working remotely and education remotely, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. But your organization plays an important role in our state. How do you collaborate with entities like the state and local governments?
So first, I'd like to start by saying thank you to the Texas Rural Funders, who have been our partner the last 2.5 years in funding the majority of the work that Connected Nation Texas has been able to do. Through that philanthropic support, we were able to publish 5 sets of data and broadband maps, the most recent, which was published January 31st of this year. That data that was able to be used by the Governor's Broadband Development Council, that was used by the legislature during the most recent legislative session, that's been used by our other state leaders, and then of course has been used at the regional and community level as well. Some of the other work that we've been doing is working directly with communities to develop local community technology action plans. So to understand what's going on in their communities, both from a supply side of broadband, meaning what's physically there, what connections do exist, but then also a demand side. So understanding what they're using broadband for in their communities, and really if skills are there, do we have an issue across Texas, maybe that residents don't know how to use telehealth in the way that they should. So do we need to do, educational campaigns so that we can all take advantage of those types of things? Do people know how to remote work? I think a lot of us took it for granted that in March of 2020 that we were able to just jump home and start working from home. I was already working from home in my role before March of 2020, but have continued through to today. And it's fortunate that I do know how to do that and I have a role doing that. But are all Texans prepared to take on such a role and be able to contribute to the economy by working from home? So do they have those skills? So thinking about that at a community level and then rolling that up to a regional level and then to a state level, really thinking about what do strategies and public policy initiatives that we can engage in, across the state to really make sure, that everyone has access, that everyone, is able to afford broadband, has an interest in using broadband at home, and then does have the skills to use broadband really to do all of the things that many of us do every day.
I think you're absolutely right. March 2020 was really a turning point in terms of remote work and the need to utilize broadband and internet access for telehealth, for work, for education. You mentioned the Governor's Broadband Development Council, which you were a member of, and we were so proud to have you as a part of that group. And for those of you who don't know, the Governor's Broadband Development Council was established in 2019 by the 86th legislative session in order to study and identify ways to provide internet access to underserved areas of Texas. Jennifer, your work with this group, they issued 2 reports to the legislature. Tell us a little bit about the work that was done by the Broadband Development Council.
Well, it was definitely an honor to be appointed by Governor Abbott to that inaugural group appointed to the Governor's Broadband Development Council. We were appointed in January of 2020, none of us having any idea what was going to happen 2 months later. And that all of a sudden, a lot more people were going to be paying attention to what the Governor's Broadband Development Council was doing. I think none of us could have imagined that. We never actually got to meet in person, which is something that's been kind of sad. I think we all assumed, okay, we're appointed and we'll have an in-person meeting, and all of the sudden, the pandemic happened and we never got to do that. But the first year serving on the council, 2020, we did issue an inaugural report in 2020, November of 2020, that included several recommendations for the state of Texas and what we really thought would be best practices for Texas to engage in. One of those was creating a state broadband office, as many other states have had broadband offices for years. And definitely, offices that are serving as a coordinating entity, not as an entity telling private companies what to do or telling communities what to do, but really to be there to be an informational resource, be a coordinator. If a state has a grant program or some incentive mechanism, having an office that it actually is administering such a program. And so also in that November 2020 report, the council recommended that Texas have a state broadband plan. Leading up to the legislative session in 2021, Texas was one of only 6 states that did not have a state broadband plan. I often make the joke that Puerto Rico has a state broadband plan, and last I checked, Puerto Rico is not a state. And so we were a little bit behind in that department in Texas by not having a state broadband plan and really a guide to look to as to what we want to do as far as connectivity in our state. And then one other recommendation that we made in that November 2020 report of the Governor's Broadband Development Council was to look at whether an incentive program made sense for the state of Texas, that whether putting some dollars toward actual infrastructure in Texas, especially for our unserved high cost areas, would make sense. And so those were those initial recommendations going into the legislative session. And I guess we can talk a little bit about that later in the conversation, what that turned into during that 2021 legislative session.
Well, we'll go right into it because we're leading right into it. But one of the recommendations that, as you stated, was the development of a state broadband development office, which the legislature did do and was created in the 87th legislature. And both you and I have been appointed to the Board of Advisors to the Comptroller's Texas Broadband Development Office, which is a great honor. So what are your thoughts on this new office and kind of what they're going to be doing moving forward?
Well, having the state broadband office up and running with staff, it could not be better timing. When we follow everything going on at the federal government with all of the billions of dollars headed towards states to support broadband initiatives, we absolutely need some sort of office within the state of Texas to be able to manage all of those dollars that are coming our way. So it could not be better timing that in House Bill 5, thank you to Representative Ashby and Senator Nichols for authoring that piece of legislation, along with every single member of the legislature voting in favor of that legislation. I think it was one of the only bills all of the entire legislative session that every single member voted for. So, I mean, absolute great thing to see the state come together in such a bipartisan way to say we really do need to focus on broadband, with the creation of the broadband office, the authorization of a state broadband plan, and the authorization of that incentive program that the state broadband office will be creating. And why that is so critical is because the federal government is about to give us a lot of money. And if we don't have an incentive program with which to distribute that money, I'm not really sure what we would do with it. So once again, the timing could not be better for us to now have a state broadband office that's getting engaged, in that coordinating fashion, and will be there to distribute those dollars once they do arrive to Texas.
Yeah, and I think that the legislature looking forward back in the 86th legislative session to create the Governor's Broadband Development Council to develop the report that made the recommendation to create the state office, and now to see it kind of come to fruition. And as an agency, our Economic Development Office is the staff for the Governor's Broadband Development Council, which is continuing and will continue to work. And we're very proud of the work that we do in support of this group that advises the governor and makes recommendations to the legislature. And for those of you who are interested, who want to learn more about the Broadband Development Council, you can go to our website, www.gov.texas.gov, go to organization, economic development, and then in the about section, you've got our boards and commissions, and the commission is there. The reports are there that Jennifer's speaking about, both from 2020 and 2021, and we'll continue to do work in this area. And of course, I'm looking forward to serving with you, Jennifer, with the State Broadband Development Office. But now let's talk about our communities. And what do our communities need to understand about access? And what are some of the lessons that we've learned over the past 2 years?
I think the biggest thing for our communities to know about access is that it's not just access. We touched on it briefly, but of course, physical access is incredibly important. You've got to have the infrastructure there to even get this conversation started. But in our communities, is that physical infrastructure that's there, is that affordable? Is there an interest in our communities to using broadband, or are there barriers going on that maybe are preventing people from subscribing? Maybe they do have the money, maybe it is affordable, but there's another barrier potentially that's preventing them from subscribing to broadband at home. And then, of course, do they have the skills to use broadband, as we discussed, whether that's to do a telemedicine visit, whether that's to remote work from home, apply for a job. We even see these days that many of our, skilled trade jobs start with an online application. And so having that access at home and the skills to apply to those jobs that you still would be going to in person is absolutely critical. And so when we're really thinking about broadband at the community level, it's great to know, what is there as far as existing infrastructure. So what is that supply side? But then what is the demand side? What are folks in our communities using broadband for, and what would they like to use it for? So what does that level of demand look like? Kind of the way I think about it, it's really a two-way conversation. If folks in our communities, they're scared of broadband, it's not affordable, maybe they don't have a device at home, they don't have the skills to use broadband, maybe they don't want to subscribe. And like I said, even if they have the money, and if there's not demand, well, then there's probably not a lot of reason to install new infrastructure. And so we really have to be thinking about broadband holistically from that access, adoption, and use, three-legged stool, so that we can make sure that, the skills are there, that the want to subscribe is there, so that we really do have that demand to push that supply side into creating, more infrastructure. And of course, we absolutely have high cost areas in our state. We're a very big state. We've got a lot of roads. We've got a lot of road miles. We have a lot of areas where it's just not very densely populated. And so costs are high. And that's where these dollars from the federal government that will ultimately flow down through the Broadband Development Office will really come in to help. But having that demand side identified to go along with that support from the federal government to help with supply is absolutely critical.
And as we're talking about what that looks like, there we go. I was about to mention the map. So talk to us about this map a little bit.
So this is a map of what broadband looks like in the state of Texas at a 25 megabit per second download and a 3 megabit per second upload. And so what those numbers mean, that's actually what the Federal Communications Commission defines as broadband. And so if you have at least a 25 megabit per second download and that 3 megabit per second upload, you are considered to have broadband available at your home or business location. So we look and see that a good portion of Texas is green, having that physical availability of broadband. That doesn't necessarily mean people are subscribing to it, but that it is physically there. But we see, of course, in East Texas and the Valley and the Panhandle, in West Texas and far West Texas, we have major pockets of the state that show up white on this map, meaning that even in 2022, we have areas of the state of Texas that, regardless of cost, regardless of skills, regardless of having a device at home, there is no broadband available for residents or businesses to subscribe to in these areas. What that looks like as far as households is about 165,000 households in our state that do not have access to broadband. Population-wise, that's about 500,000 people. And I know 500,000 people in a state that's, almost 30 million people doesn't sound like a lot, but that's a significant amount of Texans that don't have broadband. And, in our opinion, even one person not having it available is too many, but 500,000 certainly is too many.
Yeah. And I think there's a follow-up map to this. There we go.
Yeah, so what this map shows is 100 download with a 10 upload speed. And why this map is interesting, I guess, number one, we can see that a lot more of Texas turns white on this map, unfortunately, as we get to faster speeds of broadband. But why this is so interesting to look at is where federal legislation has gone, specifically with the infrastructure bill that passed late last 2021. Is that really they've set a standard for any company, any organization that's going to be building out broadband using federal dollars. The minimum speed that they have to build at is 100 download and a 20 upload. So a little bit faster than the 10 that's shown on this map. But to show the portion of Texas today that doesn't have that new minimum that we're aiming for in federal legislation, it is really telling that much of the state, probably, we'd have to tease that out, but it looks like to me, just looking at it, with my eyes right now, that probably at least half of the state physically doesn't have that 100 by 10 available to them. So once again, forget cost, forget access to devices, forget skills. Everyone in white on this map of Texas would not be able to subscribe to broadband at that 100 by 10 speed today. And we're seeing that that's just becoming more and more critical to have faster than that 25 by 3 speed as, more of us work from home, kids, on and off, whether it's pandemic related or weather related, or being asked to do school from home. But something to remember is that we didn't have a homework gap problem just show up during the pandemic. That term was coined well before the pandemic. We had school kids that would have to go sit outside, the McDonald's parking lot or the McDonald's in the parking lot and do homework, or outside the school library or the public library in the evenings. And so we had an issue where connectivity wasn't what it should have been, even leading up to COVID, especially when it comes to schools. So as we think about more and more devices that we have in our homes, and the fact that kids and parents and everyone else alike are going to be all on broadband at the same time, there's not a, oh, well, I'm going to go use the computer at 9 p.m. and one person is using the computer. Everyone's using connectivity at the same time. And so that really does show that we probably do have demand in Texas for higher speeds, much like Congress has signaled in the infrastructure bill.
Well, that brings us to a great point that I was going to talk about later, but as you're talking about education in K through 12, I wanted to bring up Operation Connectivity. And as we're talking about broadband access for public education and remote learning, I'm proud to say that's been one of the state's initiatives. And the Lone Star State is really tackling the digital divide in K through 12 with Operation Connectivity. And why don't you tell us a bit about Operation Connectivity and what that is?
So Operation Connectivity is an initiative that started pretty early on in the pandemic, in cooperation between Governor Abbott's office, the Dallas Independent School District, and the Texas Education Agency, with the primary goal of making sure that every student in Texas had a device and was connected to broadband. And so at the beginning of the pandemic, obviously what that looked like was making sure that we had that device in the hands of every single student in Texas. And oftentimes that meant trying to get a lot of hotspots out. I think all of us got tired of hearing the word hotspot because that was all over everything in 2020, was that we were getting hotspots and hotspots and hotspots. But that was the quickest way, absolutely, to get connectivity to students. And for some students, that is a permanent solution to have that hotspot. If we think about our students that travel between family members' houses during the week, or, once again, when we're having, cold weather in the winter, or you're in a different location than you normally would be, that hotspot could be absolutely critical for student connectivity. But as we think longer term in Texas about what that looks like, as far as our students, we want to make sure that at-home connectivity is available for every student in Texas, regardless of where that home is located. And even if they're moving between homes during the week, we want to make sure there's a connection in each one of those homes. And so Operation Connectivity has moved forward to really focusing on that at-home connectivity piece, has really been a leader in partnering with broadband providers through a bulk purchase agreement, that where service is already available, school districts can now work with broadband providers to bulk purchase lines of service for students to get that connectivity today where it already exists. And then that phase 3 of Operation Connectivity, which I think is even more exciting, is really looking at the areas of our state that don't have that connectivity already, and actually doing some pilot projects to get physical infrastructure into those areas so that we really are connecting every single student and teacher at home.
Yeah, and the goal is to drive forward progress around this connectivity long-term to ensure that our communities are competitive in the future. And so I'm going to switch and talk about competitiveness from an economic development standpoint, since we're the Economic Development Office. And, we know that connectivity is key for businesses and for remote working. Today, workers can choose where they live and work from home. What trends are you seeing regarding that?
So absolutely, that work from home trend, I think we've all noticed it. Something interesting that we found out in some of our work with rural communities across the state is, even when we asked up front, this was a community, rural community, kind of over in the West Texas area. We asked them, how many residents do you think are currently working from home? And the best guess was 30% of residents were probably working from home. And this was well into the pandemic, so probably early 2021 when we asked this question. And then when Connected Nation Texas actually went in and surveyed the community, turns out about 60% of residents were actually working from home. And so even our own perceptions of how many people are working from home could be different. And that's what is really important about having data at the community level, is to understand that there is demand, even in a rural Texas county, for that at-home connectivity for folks to work from home, regardless of where their job is. And, we hear often on the business development side for economic development that you can offer a company all the tax incentives in the world, all these great programs that we have in Texas to bring businesses here, but they may not go to a certain community if connectivity isn't there. And so that connectivity might be that final check mark for them, that they really need to make sure that there's strong connectivity for them to be able to locate their business in a certain part of our state.
Well, I can certainly vouch for that and back that up. Infrastructure is one of the first things that a company looks at when they're evaluating a site. And that infrastructure could mean roads, it could mean ports, it could mean fiber, it could mean connectivity. It means many different things in addition to the talent aspect. So that fiber and connectivity and access is something that's really important that companies do look at and do look for. As we're talking about rural communities, one of the state's priorities has been increasing access to the unserved and underserved populations of Texas and ensuring access to rural Texas. So what's the impact that connectivity can have on our rural communities?
I think it's absolutely life-changing. I mean, I think about all the things that I was so easily able to do in March of 2020, because I'm fortunate enough to live in an area of our state where my connectivity options were great. And that really it was pretty much a seamless transition. But I think about, when we look at our rural communities, once again, that access to telehealth, as we have more rural hospitals closing, being able to do a telehealth appointment and maybe knowing that you don't need to drive 2 hours into the emergency room because you were able to ask some important questions via telehealth, or the fact that you really do need to drive those 2 hours to the emergency room because that was identified through a telehealth appointment, I think is absolutely, critical for our rural communities. We think a lot about precision agriculture and, the agricultural endeavors all across our state, whether that's, with crops or with livestock or timber or whatever that may be. We think about all of the efficiencies that can be made with connectivity and having that available in our more rural areas where we are, producing all of the great agricultural products that our state produces. We always hear, the food, fiber, and fuel, that's what Texas is known for. And much of that is produced in our more rural areas of the state. And so we want to make sure that they remain connected, and become connected if they aren't, both for those efficiencies and for the quality of life for the folks that do live in rural Texas. We want everyone to have the same opportunities to remote work. One person in the family is remote working, and their job is in Dallas, and someone else is, raising cattle. That would be wonderful to have that diversity in economic opportunity for families, regardless of where they live in the state.
And we are seeing that in the state, companies are choosing not necessarily the major city, but some of the smaller communities or rural communities in proximity to that larger city, so that they can have that quality of life, but still be connected to work. So absolutely something that's very important. And from an economic development perspective, our economic development organizations and economic development corporations are also looking at this issue, very important to them. What are you hearing from the economic development community?
So from them directly, I know a lot of them are looking at public-private partnerships, and that's something that we always love to hear about, is how can they partner with broadband providers that are already in our communities or in nearby communities. So we've seen examples of that across the state, that our local EDCs are partnering with broadband providers to get fiber connectivity to businesses. And ultimately, when you do that, in having that fiber connectivity at the business level, that gives you the potential to expand fiber or fixed wireless or other technology into those residential residential facilities as well. So it's not just about the business piece, but that may be the draw to get connectivity there in the first place, but then to really focus on residences after, because we've gotten that connectivity there. So I do think we're going to see a lot more of that with our local EDCs partnering with providers to make sure that that business connectivity is strong in the community, but then also supporting residential connectivity, along with that. As we talked about, remote work is incredibly important, and workers do want to be able to work from home and from the office. And so having that choice available to them, I think, is going to be key moving forward.
Well, these partnerships are incredibly important, and we have 254 counties in Texas and 1,100 communities in Texas. It's a big and diverse state. So the best way to solve these problems is by working together and working collaboratively. And on that note, what questions should we be asking at the community level and at the state level regarding broadband access? You've mentioned a couple of things, the skills, the access, the affordability. What are the other questions we should be looking at that local community level?
So it's absolutely all of those things. Understanding, if broadband is affordable in a community, or if there's a portion of the community that's unable to afford broadband, knowing that and knowing the reason that they're not connected at home, that gives us an opportunity to problem solve and figure out a solution for that part of the barrier to connecting at home. So really understanding that side of it, really understanding digital skills in our communities. Are residents able to do all of the things that some of us probably take for granted? Probably many of us listening today, because we're listening to this, conversation via our computers and via broadband. Are all Texans able to do such a thing? Would they have the skills to do such a thing? I think oftentimes we think that maybe because someone's younger, that they just automatically would know how to, log onto a computer and view this wonderful event that we're engaged in today, but maybe they don't. So we need to be asking those types of questions about what kind of skills do we have? Is the workforce going to be prepared as we move into, a more skills driven, economy where we do need digital skills? Is Texas ready for that? And so we need to be asking those questions along with affordability questions, but also with actual connectivity questions. Is the connectivity actually available in our homes? Is it good data? Do we have granular data to understand maybe where connectivity has often, shown up on a map that it is, but it's really not? And so having that more granular data at the community level can lead, providers that are in the community to maybe fill those holes that we didn't realize existed because we were just looking at bad data. And that could really, be quite simple that, we'd seen that an area looked to be connected and it really wasn't. And here's a new business opportunity to go serve those residents. And so it helps both that broadband provider and it helps the residents as well. So I think there's a bunch more questions we could be asking, but really key is on that skills piece, on the affordability piece, and then really is that broadband available in the way that we think it is? And if not, improving upon that data to make sure that we're really addressing where that unserved population really is in Texas.
And so from the community questions, how do you bubble that up to the state level? What are the state level questions that we should be asking?
So I think, key again on affordability, it's something that's being addressed at the federal government level. During the pandemic, the Emergency Broadband Benefit Program was created. That was made permanent in the infrastructure bill and is now called the Affordable Connectivity Program. So there's definite interest at the federal level in helping with that affordability challenge that exists all across our country in regards to broadband. So looking at that from a Texas perspective and seeing if that federal program is enough. That may be what we need to do, is promote that federal program and make sure that all Texans that are eligible for it are aware and using that program to be able to subscribe to broadband in their homes. And if that's not enough, or that's not the right solution for Texas, I think we need to look at that from our Texas lens and see what may be appropriate as far as helping with affordability if that federal program isn't exactly right and isn't helping Texans in the way that we hope it would. And I think on the digital skills piece, once again, I don't think we could ever talk too much about digital skills, and that the workforce is really going to be trending toward more digital jobs, regardless of what the job is. It's probably going to have a digital component moving forward. And so are we making sure that students coming up through K-12 really have those skills to go do any job that they might want to do? And so looking at questions like that, I think are going to be really important moving forward in a statewide way. And then really looking at what demand looks like statewide. What do we want to aim for as far as connectivity? Do we want Texas to have bare minimum connectivity? Or do we want to be ready for whatever comes next as far as technology? I would hope that we would want to be a leader. We're a leader in so many things in Texas, especially in the economy. I would hope that we would also want to be a leader on broadband connectivity and really be trying to strive for more than the bare minimum. And so looking at what that looks like for Texas and what targets we should be really aiming for, I think is important to look at, at that state level.
And the great thing is that now we have the Texas Broadband Development Office. So we have a state office that is going to be looking at these questions and these issues. I'm sure that the Texas Workforce Commission is very interested in ensuring that the skills are there in our Texas workforce for this new digital era. And then, looking at changes to curriculum to ensure that K through 12, like you said, that the kids have the skills that they need for the access that we are now seeing at this time. So that is the end of our questions. Jennifer, anything else that you want to, that I didn't ask you about, that you want to talk about?
I'm sure we could talk about a whole bunch of things, but I feel like we covered so much that we did such a great job. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today and to chat about broadband. I think it's a topic that everyone in Texas should take an active interest in. And whether that's learning more about, what physical availability is, or helping spread the word to your neighbors that there are programs like the Affordable Connectivity Program administered by the FCC, available, or whether it's really learning about digital skills, maybe taking a class and learning a little bit more about technology. I think there's a role that we all have to play in, in this digital divide conversation. And I'm just excited to be a part of it. And I hope that everyone listening today wants to join in and be a part of this conversation as well.
Well, we are so fortunate to have you helping the state in these efforts and kind of leading the way. You truly are an asset for the state. And there, as you said at the beginning, there couldn't be a better time for all of these things to be happening and coming together. And, truly 2020 was a very difficult year for the state, for the nation, for the world. And we have all been educated on Teams meetings and Zoom meetings. And I was remembering when you were talking about the very first meetings of the Broadband Development Council and how we all met remotely every meeting. And we, that was at the very beginning of using Teams for these big meetings. And so figuring all of that out has been a challenge for everybody. But I'll reiterate what you said. Everyone should get involved and get educated and learn and continue their skills. I know I have, tried to enhance my digital skills as we all have. But Jennifer, I want to thank you for joining us and for sharing your expertise and your thoughts on this topic. It's a very important topic for our state. We're very proud that the Lone Star State is tackling the digital divide and ensuring that there's access for our all Texans across the state, large cities, small cities, rural. Everyone will have broadband access. So I want to thank you for your time. Thank our audience for joining us today. Jennifer is going to be available for a live Q&A when this session is ended. And so thanks for joining and hope you have a great day. Bye-bye.
I see here is any recommendation on how to get the funding into the local providers for rural communities instead of the larger company that only care about the metropolitan cities. Well, I'll push back on this one a little bit. I think we've got a lot of large providers that absolutely do care about our rural communities. I think we see evidence of that in the Federal Communications Commission Rural Digital Opportunity Fund. If you look at the very long list of providers that applied for assistance from the federal government for that program that is specifically for rural communities, you will see that a lot of larger providers did apply for assistance through that program, through that reverse auction format. But there is something that is keyed into in that question, is that oftentimes many of our smaller providers, they're out there providing the service, and they may not have extra employees that are out there that can go after these federal or local or state funding opportunities as they exist across the country. So it's possible that we do need to be providing more assistance to providers to go after these funds, so that when we have a provider that has 4 or 5 employees, and day in and day out, what they're doing is providing service. You're right. They're probably not applying for federal funds because they don't have someone on their team that has the time to go apply for federal funds. So thinking about ways that we can offer assistance to our smaller providers, oftentimes who are in our more rural areas, to go after those funds may really be something that we should be thinking about as a state and really across the country as a whole. Next question I see is for users in metropolitan areas that do have broadband access but are unable to afford it in their own homes. What assistance or programs are available to them? So as we've discussed, the Affordable Connectivity Program kicked off in January of this year as the more permanent version of the emergency broadband benefit that started during the COVID pandemic. With this Affordable Connectivity Program, residents are able to get up to $30 a month off a broadband subscription, which is pretty significant. And something else I should point out on this question is that many of our broadband providers offer low-cost programs. I think we could all do better to share that those programs exist. They are available if you go look at providers' websites to see that they have low-cost programs available. And those low-cost programs can be paired with that Affordable Connectivity Program. And so if you happen to have a provider in your area that does have, a $25 plan, and you're able to get $25 to support that plan from the Affordable Connectivity Program, then we have the opportunity to get broadband into homes for free where it exists. And so once again, spreading the word that these things exist, I think is the key. The programs are there. I'm just not sure that folks really realize at the level that they should that they're available. What are some steps individuals can take to try and spur broadband development in their communities? Well, I think, the biggest step is really, coming together with a multi-sector community team to really understand, as we discussed in our previous conversation, discuss that supply side, what really is in the community as far as physical broadband availability. And if that doesn't match what the data is showing, that's really where the community needs to step up and say, hey, we understand that this is the data and this is what it looks like, but this really isn't what we're experiencing. So developing that multi-sector community team to really talk through whether that data looks accurate and collect better data if necessary to say, hey, no, we actually do have a connectivity gap in this certain area. But then beyond that, thinking about the affordability piece, understanding if digital literacy is something that we need to focus on in communities. In a specific community, do we need to make sure that, our libraries and our community centers and, other great community anchor institutions that exist, have programs, hopefully free of charge, for residents to go learn those skills, whether that's to apply for a job online or whether that is to learn how to use telehealth so that you can do a telehealth appointment when necessary. I think probably all of our communities could benefit from those types of trainings. There's other great organizations out there that is really the space that they focus on fully. There's one here in Austin called Community Tech Network. They're always looking for volunteers to actually help train Texans on, how to do these things. And so one thing that we can do to support that effort is sign up as a volunteer. If you already have digital skills, learn how to become someone that can help others learn. I think that's a great thing that we can all do right now. During this time when we know that digital skills are just going to be more increasingly important as we move forward.
So, on a question asked by Ali, have you seen opportunities for public-private partnerships in broadband access?
We have, there's communities across Texas that are already engaging in these partnerships on their own directly with providers all over the state of Texas. And we actually saw a program created through one of the many, COVID related bills that passed through Congress for the NTIA to have something called the Broadband Infrastructure Program. And the main requirement of that program was for a community to partner with a broadband provider in going after that funding for the community. So I think both just at the natural level of those happening organically, along with us seeing programs at the federal level that are encouraging those public-private partnerships, I think we're seeing a lot of that. And, I will say that NTIA program doesn't have a ton of funds in it. And so I think probably what we're going to see is that a lot of the applicants across the country are, unlikely to receive funds through that application. But that's already the creation of a public-private partnership that community and that provider can then work together to look at other opportunities to improve connectivity in that specific community. So even if the funds aren't there for all of the excellent projects that were submitted to the NTIA, I think it started the conversation really strongly on that public-private partnership piece, maybe in communities where they hadn't thought about it before.
This question kind of dovetails that one. It's from Kim. Are there non-governmental granting organizations that smaller communities can or should be partnering with to help increase access to broadband and help sort of reduce any gaps, whether in funding or access?
Well, absolutely. I think, probably not as many non-governmental that are awarding dollars for infrastructure, though we have seen philanthropic organizations and other organizations partner as match organizations when a community is going after federal funds. But what I can say as far as non-governmental entities in general, and specifically philanthropy, is that we've seen the Texas Rural Funders specifically really get involved. All of those member foundations really get involved in the broadband conversation across our state and work to fund community technology planning, which, back to that, one of those first questions that we just answered during this question and answer piece is, what can communities be doing right now? It's building that multi-sector stakeholder team in our communities and really looking at the data, making sure that the data that's reported is what you experience on the ground. Learning, what is residential connectivity like? Is it too expensive? And that's the barrier in a specific community. Is it that folks don't have devices at home and that's why people aren't subscribing to broadband? Is it that they're lacking digital skills or comfortableness in using broadband in their homes? And is that why that they're not subscribing? And so learning all of those things through a planning process and being ready to go and, having data about where residents are looking for more connectivity is something that we've absolutely seen other organizations that are not governmental help support that work. And I think it's something that we're going to continue to see moving forward, is at that community level, when we've got foundations or other organizations that do believe in our communities and want to be there to support our communities, having them step in for that planning process, I think is the best thing that we can be doing right now. We've got billions, as we discussed, of federal dollars, headed out to the states in the near, not so near future. They're coming, and communities that are ready, that have a plan and know how to use those dollars, are going to be better set up for a public-private partnership. They're going to be better set up if there's funds available directly to communities. Knowing what's going on in your community and having a plan, absolutely the best thing that we can be doing right now while we're waiting for those dollars to arrive in the state of Texas.
Great. So shifting gears just a little bit, we talked about sort of digital literacy. What do you think important, or from the work that you do at Connected Nation, what are some important digital skills that you see we should be encouraging, and what do those digital skills look like?
So we've hit on it a little bit throughout this conversation, but being able to send an email, apply for a job, some of those things, many of us probably during this conversation today take those completely for granted, that's something that we could do all day, every day, maybe with our eyes closed because we're good typers. We could do all of those things right now, but that's not the reality for many, many Texans, that they could apply for a job online. And as we spoke about, a lot of our skilled trade jobs start with an online application. Throughout the pandemic, I've spoken with countless libraries that one of the biggest things that computers in libraries are used for are for people to apply for jobs. And on top of that, the librarians have, taken it upon themselves to learn how to teach digital skills so that they're actually teaching how to apply for that job online while also providing that device and that broadband connection in our libraries. And so I think that's one of the most critical skills is, could you apply for a job online, and could you do a job online if one was available to you? Could you remote work? If that was something that you chose to do. And then also the telehealth piece, I don't think telehealth is going away. I think the pandemic, if it was to go away tomorrow, I still think we're going to have a great need for telehealth. And so making sure that folks are able to know how to log on to a telehealth app, know how to turn on their video, know how to communicate with a doctor through that fashion. I think that skill is important for all of us to do, and to not be scared of communicating in that way. And so there's got to be training in the sense that we know that we're using a secure connection. And we know that, if you're having a private medical conversation, you probably don't need to do that, on the bus or, at McDonald's. You want to be able to do that in your home. And so that gets back to that connectivity at peace at home, and having that good connectivity there, paired with a device and paired with the skills to have that conversation, to take advantage of all the new technologies that we do have in existence today in 2022.
Is there any possibility of expanding Operation Connectivity to include community institutions such as libraries and community centers? I don't know if that's something, but if you have any sort of understanding of that, we'd love to hear how that potentially might expand. So
the primary focus of Operation Connectivity is our K through 12 students, and making sure that they have a device and connectivity at home. But certainly being able to go to the library to do your homework if you wanted to do so is critical. And so I'll point out that the federal E-rate program, which is for our in-school and in-library connectivity, has existed for years. And so that program is available, has been prior to COVID, for our libraries and for our schools themselves to get connected with assistance from the federal government. So those programs exist today. We have seen many libraries, distribute hotspots that are available to check out just like a book during this time. And so that's a question that I could see, maybe there's potential there for more of our libraries to have access to those hotspots that residents could check out. The libraries that I've been in communication with, I think those hotspots stay checked out pretty much all the time. So they could all use more of those. So I think absolutely there's an opportunity to make sure that our community anchor institutions are playing a role for all residents and not just K-12 students. Though, what that looks like, I think is a combination of what we have with federal E-rate funds, with philanthropic funds, and with other community funds, focusing on that piece to support those other community anchor institutions and getting that connectivity into hands of all residents, even if they're not available to have it at home today.
Mm-hmm. Well, we are sadly at the end of our time for this session. Jennifer, I want to thank you so much for talking about the work you do at Connected Nation, for being a total rock star this morning during the live Q&A and rolling with all the technical glitches that have been happening. I want to thank our audience for that as well. Adriana could not join us today due to scheduling, but I'm sure she's available, as our office is. Should you have any questions, please continue posting questions and continuing the conversations in our chat room. Our next session is going to begin at 11:30, so take this chance, stretch your legs, get a drink of water. And thank you for attending today.